Hello everybody. So we are into the week 2, and last week we did talk about the water availability, its uses, and what are the major critical issues and challenges that we are facing in today's time with respect to primarily focusing on to the Indian aspects. We did talk about earlier the introduction of the course also, that what eventually we will be discussing throughout this course, and one of the major basic topics is actually onto the water rights. So this week and primarily in next few lectures, what we are going to talk is about the water rights. So we will be discussing what are the water rights, why we need them, how it has been eventually developed, regularized, and those various aspects of the water rights. That is what we are going to discuss over here. So first thing, if you see the water which was included in one of the 8 Millennium Development Goals, which was set in 2000, and that said that we need to basically cut down the proportion of people who are unable to reach or afford safe drinking water to half. Okay. So basically the entire the number of people at that particular time in around 2000 was to be supposed to be cut down to 50% by 2050 in terms of those who did not have access to safe and affordable and significant quantity of water and basic sanitation, of course. So as per the WHO, their Millennium Development Goal, this goal in terms of drinking water has been met, while the sanitation target is still lagging far behind. So that is the case of sort of where we stand in terms of the worldwide this thing. As we told that we will be talking about water rights in today's lecture. So before we go on to what exactly are water rights, or what is right to water as our United Nations calls it. So first thing, what is the need of water rights? Why we are discussing this term water rights, and why we need such right legislatively or regulatory rights that enforces the state agencies or the government bodies to make safe and adequate amount of water available to us. So there is, if you see the insight onto the global aspects of water crisis, where the what is the status of crisis in different portions. So these are some facts actually compiled from various sources, primarily from World Bank reports, WHO and World Bank reports. So you see that average distance that a woman in Africa and part of Asia walks to collect the water is around 6 kilometers. Now that's a huge distance to get water. Okay. The average water use ranges from 200 to 300 liters in most of the countries in Europe, which are very well developed and which are quite well developed and has access to the significant amount of water resources, freshwater resources. Europe is basically rich in the freshwater resources. So their per capita consumption is as high as 200 to 300 liters per day, while if you look the lowest African and these places where there is a very high order of water scarcity, the per capita consumption falls to less than 10 liters in countries such as Mozambique. The people that lack the improved water in developing countries consume far less of water, mostly because they have to carry water from long distances and water is heavy. So, if you need to carry water for a long distance, one actually will think of cutting down its uses, so that they do not need to put that much of effort. In rural sub-Sahara Africa, there are millions of people share their domestic water sources with animals or rely on unprotected walls that are breeding ground for pathogens. And this is not the case for Africa only, this is the case actually for many other places. So, I will share a personal experience that way. We happened to visit some places in the Sundarban area, Ganga Sagar, and there are people who rely on pond waters completely filled with water hyacinths. They have just cleared a little portion of that pond and taking the water from that pond, using it for cooking purpose, feeding purpose, washing purpose. So, all their domestic water needs are getting fulfilled from that water only, whereas that same water is being used by animal and other also, because they cannot completely stop entering, it is a big pond. So, those kind of situations are there, and these are serious breeding grounds for pathogens, and that kind of cases leads to the severe waterborne epidemics that can lead to the loss of life of significant amount of people. In Tajikistan, nearly a third of population takes water from canal and irrigation ditches with risk of exposure to the agricultural runoff. Again, agricultural runoff is known to contain lot of pesticides, lot of herbicides and all that. So, these coming into the water, these are likely to, if you are collecting water from irrigation ditches in these places. So, you are exposing yourself, one is exposing oneself to these pollutants, and these are the chronic pollutants, can lead to the cancerous disease. So, immediately you will one will not recognize any problem, but in later scales one can see that the extent at which one suffers is huge. A survey of 5,000 schools in Senegal have showed that over half had no water supply and almost half had no sanitation facilities. So, of those schools with sanitation, only few or around half of them have separate facilities for boys and girls. So, you see that 50% school does not have sanitation facility at all, and those 50% which had, also half of them did not have the proper sanitation facility for proper gender specific sanitation facilities. So, that is another issues. People in slums of Jakarta, Manila, Nairobi, these places pay 5 to 10 times more for water than those living in high income areas in the same cities, and more than the consumers in London and New York. Now, this is interesting, because ideally the people earning more are actually capable of paying more for water, but because they are fed with proper water supply connections, proper metered water supply connections, they pay at a fixed tariff rate. But those who are not fed with the proper piped water supply system face this issue, because they have to rely many times onto the tanker, buying water bottles for drinking and all that. So, if you happen to buy a 20-liter cane of water for drinking purpose, you will pay minimum say 20 rupees, 25 rupees, 30 rupees, okay, minimum that much. However, if you are getting piped supply in your household, for the 20-liter of water you pay almost nothing. So, that is the situation. Those who are having well equipped water supply connections and all that, even though they will be earning in lakhs of rupees, but they are not they does not pay substantial amount of money for that their water consumption. However, those who are living in slums and unfed water area where water supply is not proper or not piped water supply, they have to rely on external sources, and in order to buying the water they need to pay more. So, that is another critical challenge. In Manila, the cost of connecting to water utility represents about 3 months income for the poorest 20% of household, which is almost raises to the 6 months income in urban part of the Kenya. So, that kind of charges are there for connecting to water utilities in some places. Okay. Overall, if you see, so as per the WHO and United Nations, around 884 million people or so, there are basically more than 1 kilometer for around 884 million people needs to move more than 1 kilometer for getting water. So, they live more than 1 kilometer away from water sources, and their water use often is less than 5 liters a day. So, at any given point of time, if you see, the close to half of the all people in developing countries are suffering from health problems caused by the poor water and sanitation. So, that is the scale of the issue. That is, we generally do not realize that what we are, because we are more self concerned that way about our status of living and all that, but if you see the holistic picture, we are in very sad state of affairs in terms of water. So, it has been estimated that unclean water and poor sanitation are the world's second biggest killer of the children. So, it has been calculated that around 443 million school days are lost each year to water related illness. So, that is the status. Now, we have been seeing that how pathetic is the situation, or how unjudicious is the situation in terms of water availability, water consumption, water economics. Okay. So, this unjudicious distribution of water is one of the major reasons that one should have a rule enforced by the states, by the governments, okay, by the legislation that provides access to the water to everyone at fair and equitable way. It is very unfair for one people paying many folds higher for that water which is available at substantially less price to a more well to do person. So, this unjudicious distribution of water is needs to be basically addressed, that is one point. Then there is million of people that lacks of access to improve water sources, as we have been discussing earlier in the entire world. That is not the case with India only, but everywhere and in most of the developing countries that is the case. Of course, the underdeveloped countries are even worse. So, water management or water governance, or this responsibility of providing adequate amount of safe and sort of affordable water to everyone should be the state's responsibility, because it's government who manages these resources as in their own authority. So, it is their responsibility also. In many countries, there has been increasing attention towards the need of improved water management system. So, how can like water be managed in an improved way, and how basically it can be distributed or made available to the entire citizens of a country or of a nation in fair and equitable way. Further, there is various factors like urbanization, industrialization, environmental degradation, then agricultural intensification, rise in per capita availability, per capita demand, not availability. So, rise in per capita demand due to the changes in the living conditions, okay, increasing population, and there are these are the major factors. Apart from that, there are social, political and economic transformations. So, these contributes the growing scarcity and demand for better management of water resources, because scarcity is going, we did see the numbers for India and various other countries, of course. So, scarcity is growing, the demand is increasing. So, a better management, a better regulatory management is needed, a better control by the state, control by the government is needed onto the water. Now, when we talk about the water rights, so rights are typically the fundamental normative rules that are set and that allow basically people to use or sort of own or use whatsoever they are doing with that according to proper legal system, social convention and ethical theory. So, that is what is expected in terms of water rights also, and rights to water were sort of becoming increasingly crucial and contested around the globe as the competition for fresh water was more and more intensifying. Now, this competition for fresh water is intensifying not only onto the just local scale, but even in the regional scale, because the water bodies does not follow the exact political lines. We have rivers that cross different nations, we have water bodies that cross the boundaries of different states. So, within there could be basically disputes, there could be we have had actually there are several disputes onto the management of water that is crossing the different states. So, interstate management or inter-nation management between the two nations, how they are sort of sorting out the judicious distribution of water in a natural water resource. So, these things are there, and that is why the proper legislation, proper this thing is needed. So, again, as water becoming scarcer and as sort of more often contested, societies pursue better rule for coordinating water use and settling conflicts. So, that is what was actually focusing onto the building up of water right okay, or rights to water. So, if you see the water rights, the right to water to satisfy the basic human need for personal and domestic uses was actually been in talk since long. Okay. So, and there has been various sort of implicit mentions of various right, and water was considered earlier into one of them. Okay. So, there has been range of international documents including international human rights treaties, declaration and various other standards which sort of protected right to water in some way or other. Most countries including UN bodies and International Development Organization initially treated water as a implicit treated sort of right to water or water as an implicit factor rather than explicit part of the human right framework. So, the countries sort of believe that it is actually embedded in the internationally recognized rights such as right to life or right to health. So, water is included in that. So, once you say that right to health, that means one has right to live healthy. In order to that, he will need adequate quantity and safe quality of water for ensuring his or her good health. So, that right to health that way was considered to have incorporated implicitly that right to water as well. Similarly, there is right to life, which different organizations believed that incorporates right to water as well, but there has been growing concern and there has been demand of mentioning water as a explicitly, not as sort of implicit to the other internationally recognized rights. In 20th century also, earlier century, we had some international treaties that explicitly recognized the right to water. Some of them were actually the Convention on Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women. So that said that women has equal right to water as any other citizen and those kind of thing. So there specifically water was mentioned in this. There was another convention which came in 1989, was Convention on Rights of the Child. So this also has explicitly recognized the human right to water. So a child needs safe quality of water in significant amount was explicitly mentioned in this convention as well. However, majority of treaties and laws has recognized water rights only implicitly, as we were mentioning earlier. So the water rights scenario in India, if you see, is the water rights scenario in India has been again brought into the attention since long, but was not explicitly mentioned as was the case in the rest of the nations or rest of the places. But there has been judicial precedences that has been sort of been arising throughout all the nations, in the different nations throughout the world, and India has generated one of the largest judicial precedences regarding the aspect of constitutional right of life and incorporating water in that. So some of these are like in High Court held in Kotwal and state of Rajasthan and others. So there they said that maintenance of health, preservation of the sanitation and environmental falls within the purview of Article 27, and thus Jaipur violated residents' rights to life by failing implement adequate sanitation measure. So they said that sanitation is actually implicit inclusion into the right to health as per the purview of Article 21. In another case in 1990, in Atokaya Thangal versus Union of India, the court considered the legitimacy of the extracting water to increase water supply in the Lakshadweep island. So this sort of it concluded that administrative agency cannot be permitted to function in a manner and to make inroads into the fundamental rights, for these are the basic element to sustain life itself. So because water is one of the basic element to sustain life, it is included in right to life, and no one has authority to invade into that. In 1991, the Supreme Court in Charan Lal Sahu case again interpreted the right to life guaranteed by Article 21 to include the right to wholesome environment. So wholesome environment included the fresh air, safe and good quality of water. So all this was again considered to be sort of implicit inclusions in Article 21. In another case, in V. Lakshmipati and others in state of Karnataka, the High Court again observed that entitlement to a clean environment is one of the recognized human rights. Okay. So that is again sort of repeated the same thing. In Subhas Kumar case, the court said that right to life includes the right to enjoy the pollution free water and air for full enjoyment of life. So, again the water was included explicitly. There has been other cases in the D.D. Vyas in Ghaziabad Development Authority case in 1993. They sort of again said that if anything endangers or impairs the quality of life in derogation of a law, a citizen has right to have resource to Article 32 of the Constitution for removing the pollution of water or air which may be detrimental to the quality of life. So, those kind of judicious precedences were given. There has been a few more in M.C. Mehta and Union of India and other cases in 1998 again concerned the problem of pollution of Ganga by Kanpur Municipal Council and duty of the government in Article 21 to ensure better quality of environment. So, they ordered government to improve the sewerage system of the city and ensure that the practice of throwing burned crops into the river was stopped, as basically directed by the court. Then in another case, Virendra Gaur and others versus State of Haryana in 1995, the court said, Supreme Court said that environmental, ecological, air, water pollution etc. should be regarded as amounting to violation of Article 21, which is right to life. So, these basically water pollution and all that were considered, were given due concern that these actually are violations under the Article 21. In Valued Citizen Welfare Reform versus Union of India case, the Supreme Court again held the tanneries that violated the citizens' right to life by discharging untreated effluent into agricultural area and local drinking water supplies. So, thereby severely polluting the drinking water. So, this is another precedence where court has sort of given that the pollution of water bodies or water supply systems, local water supply systems is a violation of right to life under Article 21 and should be protected by the states. So, this way there have been several there has been several precedences where although the right to water was not explicitly mentioned into the our constitution in that way, but our judicial system has from time to time recognized that it, whether it is explicitly mentioned or not, but a right to life or right to good health or sort of these sort of very fundamental rights incorporates right to clean environment, which includes safe water, which includes clean air and which includes other things. So, these are the sort of some of the backgrounds which enforced. This is from we saw some judicial cases from India, but there has been similar judicial precedences from other places in the world as well, where there has been like people or agencies or organization have gone to the judiciary to clarify that what they have, what they possess onto the water. So, this has sort of enforced the world community, and a need was realized to come up onto the rights of water, mentioning it explicitly. Okay. This implicit mentioning and sort of demarcation leading to so many court cases and all that has sort of give the enough background, and then the world community realizes that it needs to be mentioned explicitly, and that's what gave the worldwide accepted right to water in 2010, which we will be talking about in the next lecture. Thank you.